if we could stand and say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You can be seated. Now, our newest middle school principal is going to sing the national anthem. Just kidding. I want to welcome Awilda Tomas, the new principal of Ohio Watkins. So I hope everybody has had a good week. It's already February 21st. 1 week will be entering into March. Can't believe we're saying that. I want to thank you all here tonight. I feel like I'm still at the board meeting. It was a long night last night. Thank you all for the work that you did last week, the stories I heard, what I saw on Twitter, keeping your schools focused and calm during a very tough anniversary that we went through, our state went through, our neighbors in Broward County, and what you did to support the kids, what you've been doing since then, in particular at the middle school level, just the number of challenges and just the type of kid that you deal with at the middle school has been challenging. The threats that have come through, the knuckleheads and what they post, and the follow-through. Since we added our CAPE teams, those crisis assessment prevention evaluation teams, we've had over 185 calls to go out and support schools. Those co-located services, those of you that have other agencies, how many of you have other agencies on your campuses? So a number of you here, we've had about 1,500 referrals to these agencies. They weren't really in place to probably like November. If this doesn't tell you there's a need for mental health and support services, I don't know what does. And that's just in 60 schools. With the referendum, thank goodness for that, we're going to be expanding that. So those of you who don't have it, don't worry. We're looking at expanding that. And I know middle school is definitely a priority with what we're seeing here in our district. Good news, last night the board did approve the new job description for every school to receive a mental behavioral health professional. So we did some tweaking on the job description. Principals, you probably saw that position hopefully in your budget yesterday. Don't hire yet, okay? It is in your budget. What we are going to be working through, more information will be coming. The board does want a vetting process, some kind of a pool, if you will, that we'll create where you would hire from within. This is a different type of position, so it's not T-bargaining, it's not that type of a position. We're really looking for somebody who has a background in mental and behavioral health. So more information coming on that. So that's good news. Also, you probably saw the executive order that came out from the governor around the Common Core. You know, all have heard about that. We still have standards. I think it's very clear. Hopefully we've cleared up any misconceptions that are out there. The current standards we have are at minimum for this year and through next year, same as the same assessments. So I know I saw a little stuff on social media about the teachers saying, oh, we don't have to teach these standards anymore. That's not true. Please make sure that we know we still have standards. So because of that, I haven't said it, I'm going to be sending out, there's a link now for anybody who wants to provide input on the new standards that the governor wants to create, the standards that will lead the nation as world-class standards. You can provide input and be part of that process. So, and if there's something you like or don't like, please be sure when we send this out, and principals, if you can share this link far and wide, provide your input. Now is the time to have your voice heard. So Diana might be talking more about that later, I'm not sure. And then also because of that, we were in the midst of providing new instructional materials. And because of that, also came out from the DOE, a revised calendar and schedule about adopting new instructional materials. So math that we were just in the midst of adopting is completely put on hold and backed up 3 years, is it, Diana? 3 years. So it'll be close to a decade before you see new math textbooks. So sorry about that. We are, though, because Diana and her leadership team is working to really ensure that we have supplemental resources and supports to ensure that you have the best materials in front of kids. So more information will be coming. Also backs up literacy, which was, we were about to start the process by 2 years. Next year, so this year, basically nothing, we're kind of on hold. We will provide some supplemental resources for the schools, but no adoption happening. Next year will be CTE and world languages, which we just adopted 3 years ago. So because of that, we probably won't see a big shift. So instruction materials, so in case you don't know, is categorical funding. So it means you can really spend, and it was about 10 years ago, it used to be roughly around $17, $18 million a year that we would get. It was cut down to about $14 million a year that we get now, which doesn't cover the adoption cycles, in particular for when we do math and literacy, which are very expensive. We have to dip into other funding. So we probably will look at trying to bank some of those dollars when we have those big adoptions coming forward. So more information coming on that. And then move forward to today, Essentials Part 2. So the team has really put together, I think, a really good, how many have been to Essentials before? Or no, first time Essentials. Okay, so the majority of you know this is about how, we're in the heart of the season of getting ready for assessment, and diagnostic results are back. We're seeing some promising practices. How do we take what we've learned? How do we make adjustments mid-year now, based on that data? Are we following based on our plan that we built in, August? Is it working? Are we getting the results? And then how do we make those mid-year corrections and start some new practices? So we have a pilot going right now with 6 schools. We call them the PAPI schools. We need to think of a better name, but we do have a couple secondary schools that are in that as well. So what that is really about how do we turn around, they're at-risk schools, turn around schools, what are those practices to really make some significant gains, and gains that we're not just talking about single-digit gains, a couple points here or there, but how do we get those double-digit gains when kids are really further behind when it comes to achievement. So some of the practices that we've learned, many of you, I think all of you actually received the book, Get Better Faster and Leverage Leadership, Paul Bembrick-Santoya. His book and his research, he has been a principal, turnaround principal, he's been a teacher, he's been a principal supervisor, he leads schools now, and he has done a lot of studying and research and studying what teachers do, what leaders do that really have significant gains. So we had the opportunity about a month or so ago to hear him speak for a couple days, and he gave us a lot of new strategies when we look at our PLCs and data-driven instruction, really to take that to a whole nother level. So they've built into this, Diana, Mark, and the team, some really ways to how do we get deeper when we're thinking about our assessments and how that drives instruction to another level. One thing that always sticks to me is one of the things he talked about is we all need to teach the standard, right? The full intent and rigor of that particular standard. But how do we really define it? How I define it, we could have however many people in here are different definitions of a particular standard and what that rigor means. So how do we define that really comes out and how we're going to assess it. So when we talk about what is mastery, that really comes from how a teacher looks at mastery and how they're going to assess that mastery. So how does that, if we're going to assess a particular standard a certain way, how's that driving the pedagogy and instruction that's happening in the classroom and taking it to a whole nother level to ensure that that instruction's matching the rigor we want to see. So I'm rambling on too much. I'm getting that look from Mark that he needs to get going. So thank you all for being here today. I think you'll get a lot of information. You will be overwhelmed. You'll have more information and you probably wanted to have to take back with you, but I think you'll be set up for success when you get back to your schools. So this time I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Mark Howard.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Let's give Keith a hand. His leadership, as you guys know, has led to a lot of the progress that we're seeing with these additional positions being allocated in your school and what we're doing with mental and behavioral health. So it's greatly appreciated. So let's get started today. I think one of the most significant aspects of the morning today is the time that you all will get during an activity to work with your team away from your campus. And we've got some resources for you today, and we'll get started. I'll kind of lay those out, And after we lay some fundamental groundwork, we'll give you the resources, we'll give you an activity, and model that. Before we get started, as part of our SEL signature practices in the district, we encourage everyone to do this as part of your leadership when you're leading meetings. We do a welcoming ritual, right? And as Keith mentioned, making adjustments for the second half, but we are heads down in the work every day right now. But just stop, reflect on a success that you've had so far, and share that with a colleague. Go ahead. A success that you've seen so far. This one okay now? Should be on. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So we spend so much time talking about, we spend so much time, both with the students, the teachers, and ourselves, looking at where we need to get better, that sometimes you really have to stop and reflect on what you're doing well. We do this as a department up here. Sometimes it's about finding your strength, and it's about finding something you do really well and accelerating that or leveraging it for greater success. So thanks for doing that, and let's get started. Our agenda for today, we're going to start kind of broad and keep narrowing it down. So we're going to start with the big picture. You know, the Essentials is built kind of around the accountability model, but that all starts with the test, right? And it starts with the standards, actually. So we're going to talk a little bit about the testing blueprint, reporting categories, and then we're going to get you into your groups, and we're going to be able to kind of drill in and break it down. One of the things that we talk about a lot are systems, right? But systems are made up of these individual elements. And each of those individual elements require focus, they require skill. And so as you're going around in your schools and you're supporting teachers and they're working in their PLCs, part of the work that we're going to do today that Paul Bambrook really is a leader on thinking about really requires us to get into the standards, get into the assessments, and break down what the students are actually being asked to do and find a point of error for reteaching. And it's really about just refining that process. And what Keith said today we'll do that. The example that we'll use are the diagnostics, right? But what we're hoping for you to model today is a process that goes on recursively throughout the school year, right, with each set of assessments throughout the year in PLCs. And we start each time with our vision and our mission, because the reason that we do this, right, is so that each student can reach his or her potential. And our mission, our way of work, we talked about world-class standards. But for us, it's about creating a world-class education system, world-class schools with excellence and equity and excellence, that we empower the kids, right? We want to empower the students to have agencies, to own their own learning. I know there are a lot of schools right now that are doing data chats, have students setting goals, and when we progress monitor, it's important for students to monitor their own progress. That's part of the empowerment, right? And so this world-class education system we've identified gets built through high-quality systems, right? And I said each one of those systems is made up of elements, and it's important to identify the critical elements in each one of your systems and then build that muscle memory and build the skill. How do we become a world-class education system? Well, we have to prioritize and focus on certain things, and we've done that through our 5-year strategic plan, right? We've identified our long-term outcomes, and the one that impacts middle school specifically is ensuring high school readiness, where we said it's about getting kids on grade level in both language arts and math, so they enter high school without need of remediation, right? And hopefully are on the course to being ready for college when they graduate from high school. And not only that, that they have the habits of mind and the social emotional agency and skill that they're not missing school more than 11 days, right? That they're engaged in their learning and that they have 0 suspensions, right? And so we've talked a lot about what that means, right? But that's really about the teacher-student relationship around empathy and listening and understanding. So all of those are encapsulated in that long-term outcome. And the way that we get there is by investing in those 4 themes. And the first objective in our strategic plan calls for us to have ensure a shared commitment and collective responsibility for the academic success of every child. So that is a really powerful statement, right? When you think about your leadership team at the table and the teachers within your school, and what are you doing as a team? Everybody on campus, right? To ensure a shared commitment and collective responsibility for every child on that campus. Not your kids and my kids or those kids, right? They're all our kids. So when we talk about the strategic plan and that long-term outcome called high school readiness, we the other year set targets for you all, right? And what I just want you to know, to reflect on, is as a district, right, our 18 target was 59. We exceeded that target. You know, we make a big deal about high school graduation, and we should, right, because we had that goal of 90, right, and we met our goal, but it's also about hitting the targets on the way, because our goal is to get to 75 by 2021. And so along the way, we've identified targets. And this past year, as a system, you all hit your target. So give yourselves a hand. This feels not quite as easy to understand and get to, right? Because it's an index. But for you, it's about how many, getting every kid that you can on grade level in both language arts and math, right? That's the key. Because that's, we're working on attendance. We've seen a little bit of improvement in attendance. We've seen big improvements in suspension rates, right? So good work on that. But, and we're moving kids. We're increasing achievement incrementally, right? But that should be our focus. And this is in the resource folder for today, so you know what your school targets are in each of those years. So this is kind of been our framework, right? How do we lead culture, systems, and instruction to improve standards-based teaching and learning? And it's about how you leverage your leadership and lead in building systems, leading culture, and instruction, right? So we've talked about this a lot, and what we're going to do today kind of touches on each one of those, right? It's important to have systems like PLCs and what happens with those PLCs. But within those PLCs, there has to be a culture of high expectations, right? And there has to be a culture of efficacy and a diligence and the instructional capacity, right, to really break down the data, know the standards, and then have a plan to reteach. So it's not like these things exist in isolation, right? And the work that you do today is threaded through all three of those. All right, so this hopefully is just a review, but we gave you your winter diagnostic data. We, in the system, this is something that we've got a lot of capacity around looking at achievement data. And when we do this, we compare to standard, self, and others, right? And the way that we can do that is through that achievement three-way report, right? So you're looking at yourself compared to last year's FSA, and you're looking at cohorts, right, of kids that are moving compared to the district, right, or compared to your long-term outcome, or looking at schools that are similar to you. And that's what we do there. And then we can also compare by subject, by grade level, by teacher, and by subgroup. And what I want to point out to you as a system right now, when we look at our data, our group that is lagging the furthest behind are our ESE students, okay, as a system. Right? When we look at achievement across the board and we look at our subgroup data, our ESE students are lagging the furthest behind. What I've told you is in order for us to increase achievement as a system, we have to increase achievement for all kids, right? We're at 15% ESE, right? It's a significant percent of our population, right? And in some campuses, it's much higher than that, right? The other thing that's important to do is look at the same students over time. This is the EDW matrix report. So I want you to look at this screen because I'm going to ask you a question. And this will allow you to look at the same students or a cohort of students by comparing to the diagnostic to FSA. So on this slide, I'm asking you the following question. How many students who scored a level 2 on the FSA scored a level 3 on diagnostics? So the way that we read this report, I've selected the diagnostic here. So these rows represent the number of kids scoring a level 3 on the diagnostic, and this is FSA, so the columns represent FSA. So how many students that had a 2 then scored a 3? 34, right? Okay, so this is one school. Let me do the reveal here. So the power in this is looking at this group of kids that were level 3 last year on FSA that are now a level 2 or a level 1, right? So there's 82 kids there that on the winter diagnostic, one seemed to fall out of achievement. And if that happens, no shot at learning gains. You with me? And so it's important to identify who those kids are, who they're with. And here we have some level 4 kids that dropped out and so forth. And then you can also celebrate success, right? Because of our level 2 kids, we had 34 move up to a level 3, 1 to a 4, and 3 to a 5. So that's how you use and read the report. It attaches with it the list of students, right? So that's why that's powerful. We also provide to you these comparison graphs. You guys have seen this. You can select it by subgroup, look by gender, and then it's an easy way. And if you want to use this in a staff meeting, you can export or just grab these and put them in a PowerPoint. It compares you to the district or you to yourself or you to another school, right? So if you have a peer school that you're competing against, because I know that you are, right? And then we provide reporting categories, right? So those are all the kinds of things that you have coming out of the FSA and the diagnostic. So when we talk about the construction of the test and the standards, right, our reporting systems are set up to support it exactly as it is, okay? So the other thing I'll mention at this point is there is I don't know how many, 90 slides in this deck. We're not presenting them all today, right? Thank God. But you have the whole deck when you go back take out what you don't need, use what you need, use it as a professional development tool, use it for review, whatever you need, okay? And this is just showing, strengths and weaknesses by reporting category as well, and you can do that by grade level and so forth. Okay, so moving forward, I have just a couple of reminders about testing, okay, because it is upon us. One, from an accountability perspective, on February the 4th, I sent out an email asking the principal to identify contacts when we do accountability corrections. So before the school grade's calculated, the district and the schools get one last look at your data that you're going to be held accountable for, right? We try to clean up everything that we can, but the state is changing that process this year to a single sign-on. So we have to set up the accounts. So if you haven't done that already, just click the form, submit the names of the staff at your school that are going to do that for you, okay? And it includes these elements. The other thing, the state kind of continues to update some resources and materials. So I want to show that to you very briefly. But, the practice tests, options, that's all linked here. I think everybody's pretty familiar with it. The other thing that they just did, this is new on the state website, they posted a couple of videos. And these are very instructive. And so I've got one here. This is, I believe, the math video. I don't know if the sound's on, but it doesn't matter, Mark. But it...
Today we are going to talk about FSA mathematics.
And I'm not going to play this thing for you all the way through, but I'm just showing you as a tool for the teachers, right, as far as how responding to different item types and so forth.
The shapes are both rectangles.
It can be very instructive. The gridded response stuff is in here about what to do, what not to do, how to erase or not erase, and where to put your responses. So I'm just sharing that with you as kind of another test-taking tip. We're not that far out, so it's a resource for you to use with teachers, okay? And the other tests. So as we start to get into the content today, the purpose of today, right, one of the things that we do is that we review how kids are going to be assessed. So we know that we have the Florida standards, right? But we also have the test design, and then within the test, the item specifications, okay? So those are all linked here for you. This is not new. But one thing I just want to point out is the construction of this is these themed categories of standards. The standards and the assessment are grouped kind of like this. In reporting categories, there's a cluster of standards, and the test is weighted and represented differently by these different reporting categories or different standards. Our diagnostic test is designed the same way, proportionally, right? The reason that's important is because all of our reporting systems match this. Secondly, the other thing that I want to point out to you under the test design, it shows what percentage of the items are at DOK 1, 2, and 3. When you look at that, what you need to know is 80% of the test is at DOK 2 or higher. So if your teachers are still using level 1 questions, right, and level 1 items, and they're not using grade level text, the kids are not, they're going to struggle mightily, right? So that's why it's important to have DOK stems, asking kids to defend their answers or explain their answers or discuss their answers or write about their answers. All of those things to move those students to DOK 2 and 3. It's a different level of reasoning, and when you look at the performance, our performance reflects, right, we'll perform lower on DOK 2 items. The other thing is that the FSA uses pattern scoring, like most standardized tests. The DOK 2 and DOK 3 items are worth more, right? The writing is worth more. It's a higher DOK. And we've talked about that and shown that to you, and Diana will show that data to you here in just a minute, okay? So at this time, Diana's going to come up and get in a little bit deeper.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody. So this time of year, it proves particularly challenging for our teachers and for administrators as we're getting ready for the assessment. because we're doing two jobs basically at the same time, in addition to, of course, all the other stuff you're dealing with. Instructionally, we're focusing on teaching new content because we still have a lot of standards that haven't even been taught yet. But at the same time, we're also trying to reteach those standards that our students didn't master the first go around. So you have to kind of juggle both pieces. So that's really what we're going to talk about today, is that reteaching. How do we do that considering the time factor? Because we don't have all the time in the world. We can't start all over. We can't reteach from the very beginning. And quite frankly, it doesn't just work that way. If it worked that way, the students would have gotten it the first time around, right? So we can't do what we did the first time around. So how do we do it differently? And how do we really focus in on point of error? Figure out where students messed up the very first time around so we can hone in there and make those corrections. So that's really where we're focusing for the rest of today. So what we're going to talk about is drilling down. So Mark showed you a lot of the reports that we have, and we talked about focusing in on reporting categories. But we want to help teachers make that connection from reporting categories, which is where the state reports out on. Here are the sections, the reporting categories they give us the reports on. And then our Department of Research and Evaluation Assessments does a great job of making sure all of our assessments match those reporting categories. But then making those connections to standards for our teachers, because that's all we talk about, right, is standards, standards, standards. So making sure teachers see that connection. So what we have here, this one's for ELA, is making that connection between, okay, which standards now actually match those reporting categories. So when we say key ideas and details, we mean 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. So we make that connection for teachers. This is so you see here for ELA. ELA is easy. It actually, from grades 3 through grade 10, they're all the same. Doesn't matter which grade level you're in, all the standards match the reporting categories. Up at the top, the green, that's actually a hyperlink. So if you click on that, it actually gives you the exact reporting categories plus the weighting for every grade level. So you have that for you. It's hyperlinked right in the PowerPoint. Mathematics, little different. The reporting categories and the standards change depending on which grade level you're in. Plus in middle school, then you throw in the algebra, throw in the geometry, algebra 2 for those of you that do that on your campus. Now it changes. Again, up at the top, you have it hyperlinked so you can get to them. And as Mark said, there are a lot of slides in the presentation that are hidden. So we actually did it for you so you don't, if you want to use the slides like that for your staff, so you don't have to recreate the slides, we actually have the slides for you for every grade level in math, plus the algebra and the geometry already built. They're just hidden. Okay, so they're there for you in the presentation if you need them. And then the next slide, I think, was the most visual for me, and the team built the next slide. And I know this information. I mean, I talk to this information all the time. I live this information. I breathe this information, right? This is what I do. But seeing this next slide was so visually overwhelming and powerful. And I want you to watch this. This is why every year we struggle with our 8th grade science scores. This is why every year we talk about math and ELA and math and ELA and math and ELA, and then we get our diagnostics back and everybody goes, oh my gosh, look at our 8th grade science scores. And we're like shocked every year that they're bad, right? And one of the struggles that I often hear is, well, we're really focusing in on the reading strategies so our kids can read the test. I'm an English teacher. Reading is really important. Reading, big deal. Okay, please know, I think reading is important. Science test is a science test. It is about content. Kids have to know the content of science. Yes, they have to know how to read. If they don't know how to read, it's not going to go well for them. But it's about the content of science. Here are the science standards students need to know on our science test in order to do well. These are your tested science standards on the test. Your first row are your 6th grade science standards that are assessed on the 8th grade test. Out of the 35 content standards, and I say content standards because you actually have literacy standards that are in the science course curriculum and math standards that are in the course curriculum. But for the purpose of this slide, we're only focusing on the science content standards. So out of the 35 science content standards that are in the 6th grade science course, 27 of them are tested on the 8th grade test. In the 7th grade science course, out of the 34 science content standards, 33 of them, 33 out of 34, are tested on the 8th grade science test. And then out of the 8th grade course, out of the 40 science content standards, 34 of them are actually tested on the test. That's 94 standards are actually tested on that science test. So you want to ask me why the students aren't doing very well in the 8th grade science test? I have a couple of theories. It's overwhelming. This is a 3-year test that we give the last year of middle school. It is imperative that we are teaching science throughout all 3 years and constantly reviewing to make sure that our students are prepared. All right, so this, when you look at it this way, I think it really drives that home how important that science is. All right, so now let's go back to English for a second. When we also talk about standards, I want to take it down a little bit further, because we see all of our standards, but I want to go down even more, because our standards are complex, and we are going to see that in ELA, we're going to see that in mathematics, and we're even going to see that in science. So sometimes we're looking at our diagnostic reports or our FSQs or our USAs and we go, wow, our kids are really having a problem with 1.3 or they're really struggling with 3.8. But I think we need to drill down even further than that because there are so many aspects to our different standards. Which part of the standard are our students struggling with? And I think that's where we need to focus in on. Because if we do our reteaching on this aspect of the standard, when in reality our students were struggling with that aspect, we're going to spend all of our time reteaching this, and then our students are still going to not do very well on this particular standard. And that's where you spend your time with your teachers teaching their heart out, and then the kids still don't do very well in the FSA. And they end up not understanding why, because they feel like they did all the right things. So it's a matter of focusing in on not just, we need to have a secondary benchmark of 1.2. Well, which part of 1.2 were they not doing well on? And quite frankly, and this is going to be really hard for secondary teachers to hear, the answer is not going to be the same for every kid. Different kids are going to struggle with different parts. I want you to look at this one standard here. This is RL 1.3. Describe how a particular story's or drama's plot unfolds in a series of episodes, as well as how the characters respond or change as the plot moves toward a resolution. So this standard here, which seems relatively simple, actually has 3 different elements to it. I have to describe how a story's plot unfolds in a series of episodes. Basically, just describe a story and how the plot unfolds. This happens, and then this happens, and describe that unfolding. And then I have to do the same thing with the drama, play, which seems very similar, just 2 different text types. Except it's very different, because a drama is told strictly in dialogue, people talking. You might have a little bit of stage direction, but the entire story is unfolded through dialogue. Where in a story, not only do I have dialogue, but I have all the exposition. Plus, I even can get into the character's thoughts. So I have a lot more to work with there as a student. A lot more inference work that I have to do in a drama. A lot more challenging. 2 different concepts. And then third part, I now have to describe how the characters respond or change as the plot moves along towards a resolution. And that's not going to be explicitly stated. That's a lot of inference work. I have to figure out how the character was in the beginning, how the character was at the end, and figure out what caused that change. So if a student doesn't do very well on a particular set of questions that assessed 1.3, which part of the standard was the question assessing that the student didn't do very well on. Because that's what you want to reteach. Because if the student didn't do very well on the first part and all of your reteaching is on the third part, the student's still not going to do very well on the first part. So it's really focusing in on point of error. Which part or aspect of the standard is the student struggling with? Mathematics, you have the same thing. If you represent your three-dimensional figures using nets. That's basically, if you think of a three-dimensional box or cube and unfold it, it's a net. So represent three-dimensional figures using nets made up of rectangles and triangles, and use the nets to find the surface area of these figures, and then apply these techniques in the context of solving real-world and mathematical problems. So first of all, I have to be able to represent the three-dimensional figures using the nets. Then I have to use the nets to find the surface area, and then I have to apply those techniques in order to solve real-world problems. So if the student did not do very well on a question for G1.4, and the question assessed this aspect, which is application in a real-world context, incredibly challenging, but all of my reteaching is up here, just finding area, which, by the way, would be kind of using an algorithm, pretty simple to reteach. Great worksheet right there. And all I did was use a worksheet and teach a kid a formula over and over again. But really what I'm struggling with is application to real world, much more DOK 3. Kid's still not going to do very well. Which part of the standard, which aspect of the standard does a student need to work on? And that's where you have to drill in on. If you have PLCs up and running well in your school, that's the PLC work. That's the PLC conversation. Figuring out which part, so it has to go beyond, my kids are struggling. We're going to do a secondary benchmark calendar and we're focusing in on RL 1.3 or G 1.4 this week. You have to go deeper than that.
How do they figure out which part? That's not specific enough to diagnose that?
That is, so the question over here, so everyone on this side, that is a great question. How do you figure that out? That's exactly what our activity 4 is going to be today, so thank you for setting us up. That's exactly what the next part is going to be today. We are going to spend a large chunk of time practicing this work of how do you figure that out so you can turn around and take it back to your team. That's exactly what we're going to do today. Great question, thank you. Thank you for setting us up. Our complex standards in science, right here. You have analyze, describe how and why organisms are classified according to their shared characteristics with emphasis on the Linnaean system. Notice how in science they have it done here. You can go up from DOK1, just recalling the Linnaean system. Domains, kingdoms, all of those. Now I have to describe and classify them and compare and contrast, down to analyzing how they're classified, the way they're classified, and how they would change. So I can have a question from a DOK1 to a DOK3 on the same exact standard. Same concept. If a student messed up the DOK3 version of that standard and I'm reteaching at the DOK1 version, still not going to do very well. This is our writing piece, and it's the same slide you've seen again. I'm just re-emphasizing, and Mark talked about this as well. We realize the emphasis that writing has on our ELA scores when we want to make sure that that's something that we focus on, especially at this point in the year as we're getting closer. This is data. This is district data. You receive this particular data for your individual school already. This is a chart. The one on the right is a graph. This is for our particular district. It might look different for your school. It shows where is your relationship for what is the average writing score that is needed to hit around a level 3 on the ELA test. In our district, on average, students that get a 7 score a level 3 on the ELA test. It's an average, which means there are students that get a 7 that don't get to a level 3, and there are students that don't get all the way to a 7 that still get level 3. That's why it's an average. All right, so it's not everybody. There are schools where the reading is a struggle, so it takes students need to get up to an 8 before they get to a level 3. And then there are students where there are schools where the reading is really strong, so we see an average of a 6 still gets to a level 3. There are schools at both ends. If you're that school with the 6, you are leaving a lot of points on the table and a lot of learning gains on the table. You need to grab those writing points there. You have this individual school data in your Google folder. You also want to look at it for this reason. In the second tab of that folder, or of that Excel spreadsheet, it shows you how many zeros you have sitting in your school, how many 1s, how many 2s. Those are students you want to know and you want to work with and you want to move. It shows you your 3s, it shows you 4s, your 5s, your 6s. Zeros are ones you want to grab up and move. A student who scored a 0 only could have scored a 0 for one of a couple of reasons. Blank paper, motivation issue. A student wrote completely in a foreign language. An English language learner, their very first year of acquiring English, has acquired a lot more English in this year than he or she had last year. Okay? Or a student who straight up copied. Make sure the student understands that copying, not a good idea. All right, so you want to move those. If you're not sure where you have that particular Excel spreadsheet in your folder, it would have been sent to you from Joe Holcomb. He has a new position in his school, so he's not in on my office, so please don't email him. But happily email me. I will send you the link. So if you don't have it, can't put your fingers right on it, email me, and I am very happy to send you that link. Not a problem. All right. And we are ready to do our activity. So if you go, we're going to split up on this one. So for this activity, let me tell you what we're going to do. And Mark's setting up our activity. For this particular activity, we are going to do exactly what Ed suggested. We are going to deep dive into one of our diagnostic tests. So we can practice breaking apart a test, breaking apart a questions, and figure out exactly point of error. Where are our students going wrong? Going deep into our standards, deep into our data, and we're going to do it school specific. We need to break up into our specific diagnostic, and we sent an email earlier, it would have come from Mark, asking you to pick the particular diagnostic where you were having the most struggles in your school. So you could have picked 6th, 7th, or 8th grade ELA, 6th, 7th, or 8th math, or science. So we need to do a quick poll to kind of figure out so we can make room alignments here.
Yep, so somebody from your school can use your computer or a phone and go to menti.com, put in that 6-digit code, and just indicate which group your team's going to break into. Just take a minute. Please use your computer or your phone. Go to menti.com, put in the 6-digit code. See here. You'll see the data begin to come in, so you're just selecting a working group that you'll break into, please. And then we should end up with about 35 responses if each school responds, so. Okay, can I have your attention, please? Very briefly. So, thank you. So we've been going about an hour now, right? So I just need to give you some instruction, because in just a second, we're going to take a brief break. And what that break will allow you to do is use the restroom, refresh your drink, but when you come back from the break, your team, you're going to take your stuff, and you're going to go to a different location in the room based on the grade and subject that you've spoken or selected. And that is designated Diana?
All right, so based on the numbers here, we're going to do 6th grade ELA is going to go back into that room right over there. So 6th grade ELA will be into that back area over there. So we're going to take that 6th grade ELA sign and put it in that back area over there. 7th grade ELA, since we have a very large contingent, that will be over here, 7th grade ELA. 8th grade ELA, which is also a very large contingent, will be here in the center. 8th grade ELA. And then we'll have a small little group of 6th grade math right here. 7th grade math will be over here. 8th grade math right in the center, right there, in that corner right there, up a little bit, Vic. And then science right over there in the back.
So let me tell you why that's important. Okay?
All right, hold up. Yep.
All right. Let me tell you why that's important. Around the room, you have both Diana's team and my team here, and they're going to be supporting those various groups. I'll describe the activity and give you specific direction about the activity when you come back from your break, okay? So the reason you're going to break in is so that we can better support you, and there could be commonality and dialogue around the same test item, right, or the same standard. So that's the reason for doing this. So we'll start at 10 after 9. You've got 10 minutes. When you come back, report to that particular area of the room. Thank you.